Hello, my name is Gustavo Ribeiro, editor-in-chief of the Brazilian Report. I'm joined today by James A. Green, historian, professor, and one of the foremost American scholars of Brazilian democracy and U.S.-Brazil relations. James, always good having you. How are you?
It's great to talk to you today. I'm fine, thank you.
So this podcast is part of an initiative by the Brazilian Report and the Brazil Office Alliance. It's a joint podcast of Explaining Brazil, which we have been doing for years in the Brazilian Report, and Brazil Unfiltered, a podcast of the Washington Brazil office that is hosted by James. So we're recording this April 22, and our conversations are centering around the Brazilian upcoming elections and picking up the most important pieces of news that will help us tell the story between now and election day. And one of the things that, James, you evoked during our last conversation 2 weeks ago when we launched the partnership between the Brazil Office Alliance and the Brazilian Report was about U.S. interference in the Brazilian elections. And I think we have two things that, in my opinion, only raise those fears. One of them revolves around the case of Alexandre Ramagem, a former intelligence chief in Brazil who has been convicted for helping Jair Bolsonaro attempt a coup d'etat in Brazil. And he was briefly arrested by ICE, and later not only was Ramagem released, and he is applying for asylum, and he's going to wait in liberty while the claim is evaluated by the U.S. government. But the U.S. government requested that the Brazilian federal police officer who tipped ICE on Ramagem leave the country. So just for a brief piece of context, Alexandre Ramagem was a former congressman. He served as the head of Brazilian intelligence agency. Under his watch, the intelligence agency spied on journalists, on politicians, on hundreds of people that the Bolsonaro administration deemed as enemies. And now we see this situation unfolding. How do you see it? Do you see it as a sort of nod from the Trump administration that it will align with the Bolsonarista camp?
I think there's no questions about that. I think that clearly what is happening now, and it's very ironic because Bolsonaro supports Trump. Trump is carrying out this horrible campaign against immigrants in the United States. There are more than 1,200,000 Brazilians living in the United States, many of whom have been deported. It seems that he was arrested initially for overstaying his visa. We don't know that exactly, but I assume he had a tourist visa. He passed his 3 months, and then he escaped from the country through Guyana to the United States, flew to the United States, and now he's been released on his own recognizance to look at it. He's applied for political asylum. He was sentenced to 16 years in prison, and yes. Now the campaign in Brazil among the far right is to demand an amnesty for all the people who were involved in that. And they've tried to get that passed through Congress. So far it's been blocked, but it's an attempt. And the Trump administration has called the Bolsonaro trials a witch hunt, using the same language he's using about the 2021 invasion of the Capitol and the people who were condemned for having been involved in that attempted insurrection in the United States. Trump sees an analogy between the two, sees Bolsonaro and the people in his camp as political prisoners, as people who are being persecuted by the Supreme Court of Brazil and the Brazilian judicial system. And I think this is an attempt in that way to continue to influence. Clearly that Eduardo Bolsonaro, the brother of Flávio Bolsonaro, who is a candidate for the presidency, has been articulating in the United States, namely getting the Trump administration to attempt to punish Brazil for the actions against Bolsonaro. If you recall, initially the tariffs, the 50% tariffs were included in the demand for the raise of tariffs in Brazil, pardoning Bolsonaro, which President Lula said, "Well, I have no power to do that. It's not in my. It's before the trial is even happening, and it's the Supreme Court that makes that decision. I have no power over that." But that's clearly what's going on, and the fact that they did not allow the representative of the Brazilian government, the police officer who was involved in the investigations, to stay in the country, it clearly is a sign that they're planning to upgrade this. We don't fully understand the relations between Eduardo Bolsonaro, who was Flavio Bolsonaro's brother, in the United States with the Trump administration, but he clearly has direct connections, at least with Steve Bannon, who has an ear to the president, and therefore it's a good possibility this will be part of the election campaign.
Now, one thing that is interesting is that Ramagem, after he was released by ICE, he posted a video on social media thanking the Trump administration and saying the Trump administration intervened in his favor. Now, it is, like you said, that's a very, there's a good probability that this indeed happened. But it's also difficult to take these kind of words face value, because Eduardo Bolsonaro, like you said, former congressman, he has been for more than a year in the U.S. He has lobbied Washington to go and sanction Brazil and Brazilian officials because of the prosecution of his father, Jair Bolsonaro, for staging a coup d'etat after the 2022 election. But in doing so, sometimes Eduardo Bolsonaro publishes videos in front of the State Department building saying like, oh, we just had high-level conversations with officials. And when you dig, sometimes he was not received, sometimes he talked to very peripheral officials. So it's hard to assess to which degree these relations are indeed strong. But one thing that, and we evoked this in our last conversation, is the fact that Eduardo's brother, Flavio Bolsonaro, who is a senator and who is so far the most formidable adversary to President Lula in the October elections, he has pledged complete alliance to Trump. He has said that from Brazil's rare earths to security cooperations, that he's going to do the Trump administration's bidding in Brazil. So I think that also plays to the equation, right?
Absolutely. And I've given up trying to predict what Trump is going to do, because he's such an unstable person and can do anything any day and change his mind in 20 seconds. But I think it's very clear that he will be involved in trying to affect the election outcomes in Brazil. He lost very brutally last week in the Hungarian elections when Orbán lost. He suffered a defeat just yesterday in Virginia, when the people of Virginia decided to guarantee that there would be opportunities for more Democrats being elected in the state by redistricting the electoral boundaries in the state in response to Trump's attempts to influence the elections. And I think Trump can't hold back. He has almost an impulsive need to interfere in other countries' elections. He did that in Argentina. He certainly tried to do that in Honduras and in other countries. He sees, in a very traditional way, Latin America is U.S. backyard with the right to intervene at any time on any question. And I think he was very much inflated by the success he had in Venezuela to think he can do the same. So I cannot imagine he will not in some way try to interfere with the elections. Now, it's true, we can't really trust Eduardo Bolsonaro, but we also can't trust Trump, because both of them tend to not tell the truth a lot, to exaggerate the truth in their influence. But there is clear influence that Eduardo Bolsonaro has on the government. If not, the conditions of the Magnitsky Act and the tariffs would not have been included in the tariff negotiations. Now, to what extent Steve Bannon has Trump's ear at a given moment, to what extent this will be a key question in the elections, remains to be seen, but it clearly will be a factor.
Now, before I ask you on Trump's possible ways of interfering with the Brazilian elections, just to go back to the Ramagem case, what the U.S. diplomats have told the Brazilian Foreign Affairs Ministry is that, in their view, Brazil tried to game the immigration system in the U.S. and instead of, because the Brazilian government has requested Ramagem to be extradited to Brazil, and then saying, well, instead of waiting for the State Department to weigh in, they tried to circumvent the State Department and go to ICE and tip off ICE on the whereabouts of Ramagem. Now, how do you see that, especially considering that the State Department has Marco Rubio at its helm, and Rubio has been a staunch critic of President Lula. He has called Lula a socialist threat. He has, like you said, parroted many of the Bolsonarista talking points about the coup investigation in Brazil. How do you see this from the diplomatic standpoint and from the institutional standpoint?
Well, I mean, it's very ironic because, of course, Trump's big campaign about deporting millions or attempting to deport millions of immigrants is to claim that they're all criminals and involved in illegal activities and therefore should not be in the United States. So you would think that Ramagem would be one of the people on top of the list because he has been convicted. The Congress took away
He's literally a convicted felon.
To the Supreme Court, and the Congress, which is not a progressive Congress in any way, took away his rights as a congressperson, and therefore it seems, and I would assume, I'm not an expert on the way the international police cooperations occur, but I would assume that this kind of collaboration, informing the U.S. government that there is a convicted criminal who probably is illegally in the United States, and they should be aware of that. It would be a way of collaboration between the two countries to do that. And the Trump administration, I would assume, should be grateful that they're actually helping. And in spite of the tensions between the two countries, there's a certain amount of cooperation and collaboration. Clearly, the Ministry of Foreign Relations is doing everything possible to avoid escalating the tensions between the two countries. And I think Lula has done everything possible in that regard. Trump has been a little distracted by the war in Iran at this moment, but I think he's going to go back to it. And he can't miss an opportunity to show how powerful he is and how omnipotent he is. And I think he will do that in the elections. Now, how he'll do that, with the support of Rubio, with the support of his administration, it's hard to know. I'm an historian. I've specialized on the history of the Brazilian dictatorship, and we know very clearly that in 1962, there were gubernatorial elections 2 years before the military came to power, in which the United States invested at least $5 million in supporting the electoral campaigns of opponents of the government in power of João Goulart. That would have been about $30 million today, directly influencing Brazilian elections. So there's a history of that in the past. Fortunately, there has been a rapprochement between the two countries when it returned to democracy. But certainly, the CIA that operated in the 60s and the kinds of people who are in the CIA today are capable of doing the dirty tricks or the clandestine activities that could happen to influence the elections discreetly without the public knowing about that. So that's one concern, which is something that would be happening covertly. The other possibility is simply making public declarations by Trump that would be used to animate and to mobilize his supporters with the argument, and this was the argument that was used in Argentina, in the elections in Argentina, that when Trump promised to give Argentina $20 billion, if the people of Argentina voted against the Peronistas and who were the opposition to President Milei. So he certainly could make a statement or encourage statements for the people of Brazil to support Flavio Bolsonaro in order to get U.S. aid and government support, or to develop a lower tariff rate, or to improve the relations between the two countries. Now, this backfired when Eduardo Bolsonaro did this last year, connected to the tariffs. But I think we understand that the political situation in Brazil is extremely polarized. The recent polls indicate that Flavio Bolsonaro has a very close chance of defeating Lula at this moment. It's only a snapshot of the reality that could come. But the possibilities of Flavio Bolsonaro being elected are close. And so 1 or 2% of the voters mobilized or motivated, thinking that the United States will benefit, Brazil will benefit by the support of Trump and the Trump administration, could favor the election results for Flavio Bolsonaro. So this is very serious possibility of a kind of direct interference in the elections, which should alarm all people concerned that Brazil maintain free and democratic open elections as it has since the return to democracy in 1985.
Now, Lula, he appears to me that he's betting on what you said, that it backfired in 2025 when the association between Trump and actions against Brazil were tied to the Bolsonarista camp. And I mean, when you see what Lula has been saying over the past few days and weeks, he has chosen to be more frontally opposed to Trump. So he has said that Trump is not the emperor of the world, that the world cannot be scared of a president that wakes up and decides to bomb a country or another. And then this week, yesterday on April 21st, he said from Portugal that he is evaluating a retaliation in doing with U.S. Security officials in Brazil, the same thing that the U.S. has done to the federal police officer there. Now, there is a clear perception that the Brazilian electorate does not welcome foreign interference, and that passing himself as the guarantor of Brazilian sovereignty will help him when push comes to shove. But this is not a strategy without risk, right? Because you could enter in a tit-for-tat escalation from Trump, who is a very unpredictable actor. And I should remind our listeners that Brazil is facing a Section 301 investigation into quote-unquote unfair trade practices that the U.S. trade representative is investigating. And this could end close to the election by June, July, maybe August, with several measures to punish Brazil, including tariffs. And I mean, while this can give that rally around the flag effect among part of the electorate, that can also have very negative economic effects, right? Because Brazil is the U.S. is Brazil's #1 destination of industrial exports. If depending on the kind of sanctions that could really unravel Brazil's financial system, so it is not without its risks, this kind of strategy, right?
And including it's true. Brazilians are very nationalistic. They love their country. There's a strong sentiment. This favored the current government when Eduardo Bolsonaro managed to get this included in the tariff demands on the Trump administration. But there's also a sector of the electorate which tends to vote center-right, which is very much enamored of an imaginary of the United States, of a very powerful country, especially among evangelical Christians, many of whom have roots in their churches in the United States. And I think that there's another sector that could very much support what Trump is saying and doing, even though there might be an immediate pain on the economy, because they want to align themselves more with the United States. So there is a sentiment. It's not the majority sentiment. There is a sentiment in Brazil which is very much pro-American in a very traditional way of understanding a kind of imaginary United States that they would like to be a part of. And this is reinforced to a certain extent, I think, by certain evangelical Christians who are involved in the theology of prosperity, which means that if you are a very faithful Christian and believe in God, God will benefit, will bless you with that, with money, with success. And that's something that is very much imbued in a notion of what the United States is and how the United States functions as well. So I think that certainly could happen. I think Lula has to walk a very fine line, and sometimes I think he needs to be a little bit more judicious in what he's saying. But I think, quite frankly, the attacks on the country based on alleged infractions of trade agreements are very, very specious to me. They're not at all convincing, and clearly there's an interest by U.S. banks and to challenge different ways in which the Brazilian government is seeking a certain amount of autonomy and independence. The PIX is one example of that, the special system by which people can do cash transfers and make payments through a system through the Banco do Brasil, which makes it much easier for people to operate financially in the country, especially in a country that many, many people are marginalized and are in tremendous debt with credit cards. To have another system of making payments is a wonderful thing. And it seems that U.S. banks are very threatened by these kinds of ways in which the Brazilian government is trying to find a certain amount of autonomy and independence from dependence on foreign capital. So it's a real danger, and I think it could have an impact on the elections. It could also backfire, and I think that's the question that we'll have to see as things unfold. The other element of this is that because of the war in Iran, gas prices are going up. It's going to affect Brazil, even though Petrobras, the state oil company, has been very good about trying to alleviate the problems of pressure on the price of combustibles in Brazil. But this is also going to be an effect on the economy, because I don't see a quick resolution of the war, and I don't see a quick resolution of the problem of the high cost of gasoline in the world, including Brazil. And so this could be another pressure on the country and the economy and inflation, which could benefit the opposition to the current government and Flavio Bolsonaro's candidacy.
Now, if I may, just to answer a few things you said, when you're talking about PIX, and for non-Brazilians, it's important to state how transformative PIX has been in Brazil. It was launched in November 2020, and it has very quickly become the #1 method for money transfers in Brazil. It is, and I'm going to share an image here. It is already more than half of all transactions being done in Brazil right now. And it has come to a point when even beggars on the streets, they have QR codes and asking for PIX transfers, because money has become so dematerialized in Brazil. And this is, of course, like you said, a big threat to credit card companies, to banks that rely on fees. And PIX has been rolling out very different features. It started just as instant transfers. It has now rolled out functions of program payment, so you can pay your utilities automatically through PIX. It has launched a payment installments. And this, while we are not necessarily seeing the impact right now in the credit card industry, every expert says that within a very short span of time, PIX is going to eat up credit cards piece of the pie, and this is an existential threat for Visa or MasterCard.
No, in fact, I'm in Brazil 3 or 4 times a year. It's very frustrating that because I don't have a bank account in Banco do Brasil, I can't use it. Everyone's all the time, oh, just send me a PIX. I said, I can't do that. What do you mean you can't do that? I can't. And so it's become very, very common. And all, as you said, even beggars ask for money, and they say, could you just, send me it through PIX, So this is something that is serious.
I think one thing that is interesting is that it is so successful because of the way it was set up. So it is the whole project was headed and envisioned by the central bank, and every single financial institution that has more than a certain number of clients is forced to be a part of PIX. So it ensures that everyone can use PIX, which is one of the hurdles in other countries like Colombia or in Europe, where you don't have that, or even in the US, where you don't have that interoperationality, right?
No, it's an extremely important and beneficial product. And I think Brazilians who are aware of the impact of that have been very clear about stating the fact that the United States financial institutions, banks, investment companies are very threatened by this possibility. I joke with my friends in the 1950s when there was a movement to nationalize oil and set up the state-owned oil company Petrobras. The slogan was, the oil is ours, and I think the slogan for today should be "PIX is ours, and we need to keep it and defend it against the attempts by outside influences to try to undermine it." And I think that's one of the pressures that is an economic interest of the United States in the current administration, to try to undermine Brazil in that regard. So I think it's going to be these interferences of the U.S. government, the current government, are going to be an element in the elections this year. There's another thing that's important to mention, that Ramagem was a member of the Partido Liberal, which is the party of Flávio Bolsonaro. It's the largest conservative right-wing party in the country, extreme right-wing party. And so clearly the agenda of the far right, which is the agenda of Flávio Bolsonaro, is very aligned with the agenda of the Trump administration in the United States at this point.
Yes. And just on your point about gas prices, one thing that is important to talk when we're talking about Brazil is that gas prices in Brazil, when they go up, that is essentially a tax on everything, because we depend so much on trucks to move cargo around Brazil. If it's around like 60 to 65% of the cargo we move in Brazil relies on trucks, and these are diesel-powered vehicles. At one point after the war started in Iran, in some regions, these diesel prices had gone up by more than 28%. They have since calmed down a little bit, but they stay way above February levels, and that impacts food prices. And I mean, when inflation goes up, it means that the central bank must keep interest rates up. Brazil has already the second highest real interest rates in the world, and the benchmark rate is currently at 14.75%. So this creates many other problems in terms of credit, in terms of the indebtedness of the population, which things that we are going to discuss in other programs. But yes, there are certainly a lot of risks that will impact the election coming from the U.S.
And if I may just jump in on one last thing, which is it's oil prices, but it's also fertilizer coming from the Middle East, which is extremely important for agricultural production. And because the economic model in Brazil is depending on export of agricultural goods, is a very important part of the economy. It's going to have a huge effect on prices. As fertilizer is essential for production. Let me plug the Brazil Report in that regard, because the Brazil Report has excellent articles about all of these issues in their weekly and daily reports. And one learns a lot about the country by reading the Brazil Report, including its specific article I just read the other day about fertilizers. I learned a lot about that. And the government is trying to address that by establishing their own autonomy and development of fertilizers in Brazil to encourage national production as opposed to relying on international importing of international sources of fertilizers.
No, definitely. And James, we are talking about these risks coming from the U.S., and one of them maybe in the minds of many analysts, probably the biggest threat coming is the possibility of the U.S. Taking a harsher stance on Brazil on security issues. And I mean, let's remember that the capture of Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela was framed as a law enforcement operation and not a military operation. Now we are seeing calls that are going louder and louder from U.S. officials, but also from the Brazilian U.S.-aligned far right to classify the PCC and the Red Command, so Brazil's two biggest crime syndicates, as terrorist organizations. Now, just a piece of context, the PCC, the first command of the capital, was born in 1993 inside the São Paulo prison, and it was a it started as a sort of inmates union as a direct response to a police massacre that had killed more than 100 inmates. And it grew into a sort of decentralized network. There's no like El Chapo figure at its head. Now it operates in almost every single Brazilian state. It operates across multiple countries. It has tentacles reaching the US, Europe, Africa, and Asia. And in 2021, the US Treasury Department designated it as the most powerful organized crime group in Brazil and among the most powerful in the world. And the Red Command, as we call in Brazil, the CV, emerged in Rio de Janeiro in the 1970s. It has extended its reach around the country, across the country, and especially in the Amazon region. Now, by any measure, these groups, they are formidable criminal enterprises. They exert territorial control over significant parts of the country. They are responsible for cross-border crimes, and they use tactics that are similar to those employed by terrorist groups. But they are not considered terrorist groups in Brazil because Brazil's terrorism law is very specific in what constitutes a terrorist organization. And they describe it as organizations that use violence motivated by xenophobia, religion, or prejudice, which is not the case neither of the PCC nor the CV. These are profit-driven criminals. I want to ask you to weigh in on one in-depth article by the Wall Street Journal talking about how the PCC has become this huge threat. And I want to single out one specific line, because I read it as this sort of part of a broader campaign for the U.S. government to consider the PCC and the CV as terrorist organizations. It says, quote, "Cocaine, though, remains the PCC's core business, and that means that the gang has also become America's problem," end quote. So I want to ask you to weigh in, because we shall not forget the fact that who is the Wall Street Journal's, what is the ownership situation with the Wall Street Journal? It is part of the News Corporation of Rupert Murdoch. How, and I want you as the American one in this conversation to explain a little bit the weight of the journal, the weight of News Corp in the America media ecosystem, and the influence it exerts in the Trump administration.
So it's very complex, because Rupert Murdoch is a very conservative figure that bought Fox News and built really an empire of the far right in the United States, and is kind of a founding father in the expansion of the extreme right and Donald Trump. However, it recently has been in conflict with Trump. For example, it published the news of the Epstein files of the kind of obscene pornographic birthday card that Donald Trump sent to Epstein for his 50th birthday, in which Donald Trump denied that he had done that and sued the Wall Street Journal for $10 billion. And the courts threw out this claim saying which is wrong. And now Donald Trump claims that the Wall Street Journal is a part of the witch hunt against him and is a communist organization. It's a very conservative journal which supports finance capitalism. It's considered a very moderate or reasonable journal in terms of expressing certain editorial positions or tending to support traditionally the Republican Party against the Democrats. And so when I read articles like this, I read them and I think, is this the editorial decision, or is this the independence of the individual journalist who was writing this? So it could be one or the other. The issue here, the important issue here, is that what Trump is trying to do is to threaten that Brazil will be declared in supporting a narco-terrorist organization, declaring PCC to be narco-terrorist, which would allow the United States to claim the possibility of some kind of direct intervention. Although the majority, as I understand it, of the cocaine that transits Brazil from Colombia, from Peru, Bolivia, goes to Europe and not to the United States. But nevertheless, and this is connected to the fact that for years, the far right has circulated false information, fake information, alleging that in some way Lula has received support from people who are connected to the PCC. Nothing based on any facts or any proof in any way, but it's one of these fake information ideas that circulates widely, and millions of people in Brazil from the far right who live in the bubble of the far right believe that. And so by declaring PCC a narco-terrorist organization and then making the allegations, even if it's only informally through the far right media networks, that Lula is involved in that, you create the idea that Lula is a criminal himself. Not necessarily that the United States is going to invade the country and try to take out Lula. That's not going to happen. But that it will influence the election results, just as other fake news circulated in the elections against between Bolsonaro and Haddad in 18, and then in 22 in the election between Bolsonaro and Lula. So this is the great danger, using this discursively as an argument to discredit, to create images about Lula in Brazil and actually internationally, which could weaken international solidarity with Brazil and the support for free and fair elections in 2026. So that's the biggest danger for me. I think I'm assuming that if there still are sane people within the State Department who have any positions of power, they realize that Brazil is not Venezuela. It's a huge country, very, very powerful in many different ways. And to try to carry out some kind of military action of this kind would be absolutely impossible. And we can argue this, and people say, well, in 1964, the US government supported the coup, and they did send a naval task force to try to intervene if it were necessary in 1964. But I think that's very unlikely today. And secondly, Trump thought he was going to walk into Iran, have a war, it would be over in 3 days, everything would be fine. And we're seeing him sucked into a situation which he doesn't know how to get out of, making all these threats, but actually they're all bluffs on his part. And so I think it's less and less likely that there'll be the kind of military actions that happen in Venezuela, but much more likely the kind of circulation of fake news or false news that could have an impact on that 2%, 3% of the electorate, which is undecided, could vote for Lula, could vote for Flavio in the second round of the elections, if there's a second round, or decide not to vote at all, and therefore weaken the possibility of Lula being elected and strengthening the possibility of Flavio Bolsonaro being elected. That's, I think, the biggest danger for me, although I understand the context and I understand very well the history of U.S. intervention in Brazil over the last 200 years.
Now, it's to your point, the problem with this situation is that it leaves the Lula camp, the Brazilian government, in a very precarious position, because it has been adamantly against this kind of thing, because I mean, it has many ripple effects that just this mano dura approach to security does not take into account. For instance, many companies in Brazil have to pay these criminal organizations in order not to have their cargo stolen. So it's then if you label them as terrorist organizations, now these companies can face several compliance issues, several can be punished in several ways, because they would be financing a terrorist organization. You also have, and we have seen many federal police operations in Brazil showing that these organizations are making their way into the formal economy. It would expose many, if not all, Brazilian financial institutions, because if one account linked to a terrorist organization is spotted, then it could unravel all sorts of sanctions against this bank. So it is a big threat to the Brazilian financial system, and it is a ready-made attack. Oh, the Lula administration is advocating for the PCC and for the CV. So it is a very precarious position for the Brazilian government.
And the U.S. government uses the term terrorist in this very irresponsible and generic way, like communist was used to attack anyone in the past, in a very broad and generic way. And I really do agree with the definition of the Brazilian government. If we look historically, during the military regime, students, young activists, some of them decided to join revolutionary organizations to overthrow the government. The military called them terrorists. They had clear political goals. They did rob banks in order to finance their activities. They did kidnap ambassadors in order to demand the release of political prisoners. But it was all absolutely based on political motives, no financial gain. On the contrary, it was a constant fight for just bare survival by these organizations. But their goal were very political, and they clearly were established this way. And there's nothing political about PCC other than they're wanting to buy politicians to be in their camp to support their activities, because they're a money-making organization. That's what they're all about. And they even do things such as organize to expand their areas of influence. They pose as evangelical Christian ministers. They go and they set up churches. They organize soccer clubs to recruit young people to them. It's all about building a huge network, as you said, decentralized and not hierarchical in that sense, that allows them to make huge amounts of money. And the ordinary people of Brazil are victims of that. So it's a serious problem that needs to be addressed, but not through the means that the United States government is trying to manipulate a bad situation in Brazil for political advantages in the elections in 26.
No, and this is the kind of issue that really strikes a chord with the Brazilian electorate, because violence is one of the number one concerns of individuals of every income, every part of the income ladder, regardless of age, regardless of region. And for instance, in São Paulo, even in affluent neighborhoods, there is an epidemic of phone theft, and the PCC has a hand on it, because then it uses to hack into bank accounts, take loans on people's names, and it becomes like a real problem for people. So many people says, I don't want to know how you're going to tackle and defeat them. I just want you to do it. And then, to your point, politically is very complicated to defend this complex approach of, yes, we have to tackle the PCC and the CV, but this is not the right way. So yes, it can have a real political effect, because, like you said, Brazilian politics is very much calcified. For a big part of the electorate, it doesn't matter what the Lula administration delivers. They will not vote for Lula regardless. So we are in that situation, and it's pretty similar to the US reality, where at the same time, nothing matters for a lot of folks, and then everything matters for a very small amount of voters. And these are the voters that flip elections, that are getting decided by thinner and thinner margins.
Yeah, you have in the situation in the electoral dynamic, you have a polarization. So there's a clear core 30 to 40%, which is going to vote for Lula, going to vote for the left. There's a core 30 or 40% that's going to vote for the right. And then there's this group in the middle. And that the numbers are very flexible. They change over time. And those are the determining people. You know, I will confess, I was getting into an Uber, confirming the license plate of the Uber on Paulista Avenue last year. Someone went by on a motorcycle and on a bike and stole my cell phone. I was furious. I wanted to kill the person at the moment they did that, because it was got so many problems related to having your cell phone stolen in terms of your credit card and et cetera, et cetera. And then I took a deep breath and said, it's only a cell phone, I'll buy another one, et cetera. But for most people, cell phones, as an example, are crucial for their lives in Brazil, from all social classes. So this kind of violence against people is devastating for them. It's extremely
including as for work, because many people sell goods through WhatsApp. So it is more than just a hassle. And if I may, because I've been in those shoes 2 years ago. I was robbed on Paulista Avenue as well. And I cannot recommend enough for people listening to this. If you are in Brazil, download the app Celular Seguro that was launched by the federal government, because once you can go, you have to have a gov.br account. So it's an account with the Brazilian government, but then you can block the cell phone and they can no longer use it for hacking into your bank accounts. So I was robbed, but they didn't take any money away from my account. So I, quote, only lost the phone.
I love Brazil. I travel there all the time. It's the country that I love more than any other country in the world. So I know all of its good sides and its bad sides. But when I try to, everyone said, you need to register this with the police to get insurance on it. You have to do a BO, a boletim de ocorrência, and I tried to do that online, and you can't do that if you're not a citizen of Brazil. There's no way in the menu for you to go down to be which state you're from. If you're not in one of the states of Brazil, you can't do that. So I gave up and I didn't bother to go to the police on Monday to report it. But it is an issue, and it's an issue that affects all social classes, and it generates a lot of anger. And in the past, the left has not been good about thinking broadly about a good answer to how to respond to the question. The biggest answer is these are deeply rooted socioeconomic inequalities in the country, which are rooted in its legacies of the past. And that's why many poor people resort to violence in order to survive, which is true. It's a much better way to survive stealing cell phones than it is working at a minimum wage in some as a delivery boy or something like that. So I get it, but the left has to find a better way to explain how to respond to violence without resorting to the law and order hard line, let's kill them all discourse that the far right has developed over years. So it's a weakness of the Lula campaign not to have a more sophisticated and comprehensive explanation for how to respond to the violence in Brazil, which is there, and how to combat PCC, how to combat Comando Vermelho, how to combat organized crime in the country.
And with that, I think we come to an end to our conversation. And just to say that in a few days, the Workers' Party, Lula's Workers' Party, is holding its National Congress, and it will present its vision for the country. So maybe 2 weeks from now, when we have our next podcast, we may discuss whether or not they will have a sophisticated and palatable messaging to Brazilian voters in regards to public safety. James, it was a pleasure talking to you as always, and see you in 2 weeks from now.
And to our listeners, até a próxima vez. Tchau, tchau.